I just wanted to say one thing, just to express my gratitude to the president for flying in from Madrid specifically for this event. We've been honored to be associated with him on a lot of different projects, including the Octavian report for many years, and I know we've talked a lot today about how the world is adrift and there's a lot of lack of leadership. His political record stands on its own, but as you'll hear, he's truly, I think, one of the world's great moral leaders, and I think if we had more people like President Aznar in office today, we'd be in a very different spot. And thank you also, Edward, for doing this. Edward's the editor-in-chief of Time magazine, so thank you.
Happy to. Thanks, Richard. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hard to know where to begin.
Very pleased to be here.
It's hard to know where to begin. What a news cycle we're in. I was going to begin with Spain, but I'm tempted to begin in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. I don't know how closely you're following the yesterday's testimony in particular, closed-door testimony with Bill Taylor of the State Department and have you followed the American impeachment cycle, and what do you make of this crisis over on this side of the Atlantic?
For the first question, is not bad.
Softball first.
No, I follow all the process of impeachment. No, but this is a very special American system to try to impeach the president. I follow as well another in the history, with the presidency of Bill Clinton, and now is with Mr. Trump. If I am not commit my mistake in my interpretation, if the impeachment follows ahead, in the House can win, but in the Senate can lose. The consequences is not impeachment. But the question is that maybe this process, this decision, can reinforce the confrontation between the two parts of the American politics, Democrats and Republicans. And for me, that I am an Atlanticist totally convinced. And for me, the situation and the leadership of the United States in the world is decisive. This lack of bipartisan initiatives in different circumstances in a lot of things is not a good news. And this situation of confrontation and division in American society is not the best for the exercise of leadership or for the health of the theoretically allies of the United States. But I hope that I think that one of the most important necessities of this society is trying to recover some common purposes, common goals, common initiatives, and to share some ideas around the domestic questions and the evolution and necessities in the world. No? This will produce more stability and more tranquility in several parts of the world. No? The excess of confrontation is no good in other parts of the world.
I mean, it really hits two themes that go well beyond the United States. As I thought in advance about our conversation, and we'll get to Europe, we'll talk about the Middle East, but the two themes run pretty globally. One is, as you mentioned, this sort of one of the headlines on the New York Times homepage this morning is "Centrism is canceled." That the divisiveness that's everywhere, including Spain, and we'll get to that. But also, back to Trump for a moment, the role of American leadership in You've spoken eloquently about this moment of divide between the liberal order and authoritarianism. Where do you see the current U.S. leadership in that struggle?
Well, I think if the question is to have in mind some right idea about the strategic situation in the world. In my view, the international order based in the rules after the Second World War is over, but the world that beginning and start born in after the Cold War is as well over. And we live in a change, not at the international system, not in the norms of the international system, but in the international order. And this change is fundamental for the political changes in the US and the eruption of the situation of China. And this is the question. The question is, for the US in the current situation, with more instability, a lot of domestic problems, it's very complicated to exercise the leadership in the case that they want to exercise the leadership, global leadership. And now, strategically, the question is US and China. In the next decade, will be more and more US and China. And this means for both parts, more bilateralism, less multilateralism, more unilateralism, more tendency of resolve among them the problems, less presence for the international bodies and institutions, and less possibilities for cooperate in a lot of things, in different things. No? For instance, climate change or terrorism and so on. No? And the confrontation between US and China will be increasingly important in the future. Confrontation, rivalry, competition. Rivalry. For the rest of the world, maybe for Europe, the question is strategically, how is possible to do in these circumstances? And now for Europeans, for instance, as you tell, you are based our life, our history in the last 70 years after the Second World War, and in the Atlantic policy. But the Atlantic policy is not the best option today, or the more important option for this administration of the President Trump. They don't like. They don't like NATO. They don't like European Union. They don't like former allies. But one thing is important for us. It is one of the problems strategically most important for the European Union, is Atlantic policy is not NATO organization. It's not a military association. It's an historical association based in the values that we share politically, economically, culturally, socially, that produce the most impressive expansion of freedom and democracy in the world, at the most impressive expansion of prosperity in the world. The question is, why? Why? We must to renounce, to abandon these pillars of the free world, of the prosperous world, of the stable world. Why? This situation has been bad for the US? No. The US has been the hegemon power in the world. The hegemony of the United States was total. And the capability of the United States to try to resolve the situation. What are the problems? But obviously, with problems. But the United States has going to pay more price that it is desirable to keeping this hegemony. I think no. I think for the United States it's more complicated a disaggregation in the European Union than a stable Europe. And the United States for the leadership needed allies. Excuse me, not bully allies, talking with allies. And trying to reinforce some kind of alliance. You know perfectly, we know perfectly that in the future the most important competition in the world will be in the East Asia, will be in relation with China. But why is necessary to renounce at the classical values, the classical alliance that has established these pillars that favor freedom, prosperity, and stability and democracy? I don't know. And now we commemorate next month the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Or better, even better, the 30th anniversary of the destruction of the Berlin Wall, more than fall. But you live in today with the challenge for the liberal democracies, the illiberal democracies, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, neo-totalitarianism, are looking in the world all the problems that produce. No? If you put in this hand this evolution, and in other hand establish the consequences, immense consequences, huge consequences of the technological revolution, we must, we must pay attention, especially in these circumstances in the world. Now, in my view, the evolution inevitably in this moment for the world in the future will be, more protectionism, more borders, more nationalism, less cooperation, and more nation states and less expression of the politics in the international system. This is my view.
It is a fascinating moment. Obviously, inequality has increased significantly, but to your point about prosperity, unemployment is down in many parts of the world. More kids living to the age of 5 as medicine gets better. Millions of people lifted out of poverty in China, and so we're, what do you make? You're a student of history. We just went through some of it. Been in public life a long time. When you look at the broad patterns, the move away from multilateralism toward authoritarianism, but also some of what's happening to improve people's day-to-day lives around the world, are you an optimist or a pessimist, or what is your outlook?
I think we have reason to be. I'm realistic now. We have the capacity to improve in the things. I can to resolve all the situation. We can to resolve the climate, the situation of climate or inequality. I can resolve. We can improve. The difference of liberal in European sense, or liberal conservative policies, or other policies, is that we're trying to establish a solution of all the things that happen in the world. We can improve or no the situation. In the 60s of last century, I am very young still, no? But
Me too.
No, you don't exist probably. But I recall very well that exists an international institution very famous, with the Club of Roma, Roman Club. And the dogma of the Roman Club was that that it's impossible for the world to support more than 2,000 million persons. As a consequence,
right,
economically, the result was that they suggest zero growth as recommendation over the world. Well, look in the world today. This dogma is a totally false dogma. And today, all the calls around the destruction of the world, every day we listen a threat over the possibility to survive for the world. I don't believe in this. I believe in the capacity of the human being to try to establish improving this condition. No? Looking at the world in 1990, how many people has living from poverty? How new middle classes exist today? It's very impressive in the world. In the beginning of the last century, 90% of the population living in poverty in the world. Today, 10% of the population live in poverty. It's true that in a lot of countries, middle class are living in a weak position. Yes, it's true. But in comparison with some decades ago, the advance is extremely important. And now, one question is, what happened in some countries today? I think the new dogma is inequality. Really, it is possible that the richest of the richest will be richest or more richest. But it's undoubtedly that a lot of people, hundreds of millions of people, live in poverty. And the societies are with more balances today than some decades ago. Well, we're living in a moment of enormous changes. In these challenges, you establish some attention of the consequences for democracy, liberal democracy, for technological revolution. What would be the consequence for our societies of the technological revolution? Well, it would be very absolutely impressive. But today, the technological revolutions change institutions, change politics, change the economy, change social behavior, change a lot. And we must attend this. And the evolution in the future of artificial intelligence will have more and more and more. Well, this situation are going to produce more and more instability in the world in the short term? I think yes. But for me, it's very curious situation now. For instance, if you look in another parts of America, Latin America, very complicated situation. But the vice president of Venezuela said the day before yesterday, the Bolivarian wind blow again strong. Looking what happened in Argentina, in Chile, emergency state, in Bolivia, in Peru, in Ecuador, in all the Central American countries, looking. But looking what happened in France, with the yellow products, or look at what happened in Spain with separatists or nationalists that use violence. Well, there is a lot of things, no? And trying to understand this is very important to try to establish some solution and to be optimistic or to pessimistic. No? Trying to understand well. If you ask me, I don't know, if you ask me about this after how happened in UK, how is Brexit? An expression of the confusion in the world, a huge mess. It's almost impossible to understand what happened.
I agree.
Almost.
And
But only other consequence is, what are the consequences of it? A process of self-destruction. Unbelievable. But finally, the United Kingdom will be less united, less kingdom. No, maybe continue in the European Union or no, I don't know. But they don't know what is the problem.
You want to move to the Middle East for a few minutes, but before we do, you mentioned the planet's capacity to adjust, talking about population. But in the climate context, I know you've said in the past, expressed some worry about alarmism, particularly around fossil fuels and shutting them off overnight. It's pretty clear that we're not going to shut them off overnight. Do you worry about a different kind of alarmism, which is the sort of fear of overnight change paralyzes? I mean, the science is pretty clear on the warming of the planet. Recognizing we're not going to change and drop fossil fuels overnight, are we doing enough fast enough?
In my time of government, I signed the Kyoto Protocol, and I was the first president in the history of Spain that created Ministry of Environment. And then they promote the new fiscal program in favor of renewables in Spain. And yeah, I did something. And now, maybe happen a lot of things in this question of the climate change. No? But I don't like the fundamentalists in the world. I don't like the people that is fundamentalist in the world. But because I have here, for instance, 40 reports of the United Nations since 1970s, in the 70s of the last century. In the 70s of the last century, the United Nations panel relating with this question, warning about the new ice age. But in 2020, there is non-exist New York, that didn't exist. There is non-exist New York as consequence of the ice age, not as consequence of the warming, the climate change. Well, I think things happen, but please don't tell me that we are in 1 week, in 2 weeks in the apocalypse and in the end of the world, because it's untrue. It's not true. And in the same that the zero growth in the 60s of the last century is the same as this. With all my respect, but I don't believe in the fundamentalists of the climate changes. I don't believe in this kind of fundamentalist. I understand perfectly, in this, my political point of view, that you take care of this social group, of this social group, of this social group, of this social group. But don't forget the majority of the country. Because the majority of the country is the most important group. And you must focus your attention in the majority of the country. And to establish this respect. Not establish new tyrannies. And one of the things that's happening in the world is that the new tyrannies challenge liberal democracies. And I explain very simply my position. I defend liberal democracy. I defend international liberal order. I defend policies based in freedom in open societies, freedom of speech, freedom thing. Free trade, and all these things. I think the world is better with this kind of ideas. I think we have, or I am today, probably part of a minority in the world and defending these ideas. But I will continue, because I don't believe that the world fall in the hands of the fundamentalist people.
I want to leave a few minutes for questions from the audience, but not before we talk a little about the Middle East, where I know you've been active, thought a lot. Do you, first of all, do you think that Trump was right to pull out of the Iran deal?
If you consider, you can consider different situations, because I like to establish my assessment about the people in relation of the acts. No? If you're looking in the Middle East, I am supporter of Israel. I am the founder of a very important association that is the Friend of Israel Initiative. Well, I believe that the decisions relating with the embassy in Jerusalem and another decisions of the Golan Heights and so on, these are good decisions. The problem is the coherence or the consistencies of the American policy in the Middle East. That is not enough. That is not easy. But personally, for me, politically, I understand very well, I can understand very well the decision about Turkey, for instance, no? Kurds. But the consequence of this decision had been very problematic for the confidence of the trust of the United States. If you have an ally to defeat terror, ISIS, and the ally is a loyal ally to defeat ISIS, if you can defeat ISIS, you cannot put alone and changes totally your behavior relating with this ally. Because in politics, there is one thing that is basic, and this thing is trust. What thinking of this decision now in North Korea or in Iran or in Venezuela? But what thinking about this decision in Europe, in the allies in Asia, South Korea, or Japan, or Australia, or in other parts of the Middle East? You can imagine that you are very happy, or maybe Mr. President Trump, he's very happy to take the decision to leave all the American, to pull out all the American troops. Well, and then he authorized the invasion and the intervention of Turkey. And then he punished Turkish. And then he punished Kurds. And then he left the ground, and the Russians is on the ground. And now Russian and Turkish reach a deal to control the area. And the president continued to be very happy. Well, with all my respect, this is not the best example of a consistent policy that the world needed. No. This is another kind of question. It is not easy, but we must reinforce Israel, our allies, to contain the threat of Iranian threat, and trying to improve the situation, not trying to resolve the situation. Resolve the situation of the Middle East is almost impossible. You tend to resolve every day, and every day it's impossible to resolve. Not trying to improve the situation, but to be with some consistency. It's not the first time, but the trust, confidence, the recognizing the exercise, the importance of the leadership is very important. It's not only the current president, excuse me, but the President Obama, when he established the red line and he accepted that the people crossed the red line without consequence, established a very bad precedent. Very bad precedent. Then, after this, to trying to improve another situation, other circumstances in the world will be more complicated.
Let's, we have a few minutes, questions for the President.
10 years from now, the European Union will be stronger than it is now, or weaker?
Excuse me, you can...
Prime Minister, do you think that the European Union, 10 years from now, what's your forecast? Is it going to be stronger? It's a novel idea, it's great, but some people feel otherwise. So do you think it will be stronger years from now or weaker?
I am pro-European because I think that the European Union is a very great success. And the European Union cannot be a very great success without the support of Americans. And the success of Europe is the success of America. And the success of the Atlantic policy. But if you're looking back, the history of the European countries is very complicated. We're living in war, a lot of centuries. With Spain, France, UK, Germany. We are suffered 2 world wars last century, and a Cold War, and a lot of conflicts. And we established this fantastic initiative that is the European Union. A lot of countries with huge stories, with different cultures, different languages, with a very, very strong histories, decided to share sovereignty, share initiatives, share possibilities, share goals. And this is a very good initiative. And trying to dismantle this, for me, is a very serious mistake. For me, the Brexit is a mistake, a serious mistake. But this is a problem for the UK, and that is a problem for the European Union. Obviously, if the UK leave, okay, the UK leave, but the European Union continue to be the most important, the largest market, economic market in the world. But this is not enough. We're talking about politics. And it is not easy, but don't desegregate the European Union, because it's more important. You can establish more exigence, and we needed a lot of things in Europe. We needed to rethinking our welfare state, because it's untenable to have the 6% of the population, 25% of the world wealth, and the 50% of the social expenditure in the world. That is impossible. We cannot keep in our welfare state. This is a problem of the instability in our societies. No? We must do a lot of things, but please not to segregate, not establish divisions in the European Union, because historically the European Union, I think, is a good idea.
Others? The 2 over here.
Prime Minister, you've talked about the importance of your support of the great Western liberal tradition. You've talked about your support of the great Western liberal tradition. But you've also talked about some of the challenges within the European Union, specifically how some groups, the Yellow Jackets or others, might feel specifically disenfranchised by the distance of Brussels from their daily lives. So how can you reconcile, or how can we reconcile, the conflict between the sense that people want to govern their own lives and the sense that Brussels is much too distant for their lives to be under their own control?
You know, where some national government is incapable to resolve some circumstances, blame Brussels. Is the more easy position. How is he guilty of this situation? Brussels. But Brussels is the, for instance, Brussels is the problem, serious problem, when you're talking about for the Italian indebtedness? No. Brussels is the problem when you're talking about the lack of growth in some countries relating with the lack of structural reforms in domestic economy? No. My view about Europe is I believe in the national states. I believe in a very flexible economy. I believe in a strong Atlantic relationship. I believe that we must to take very important strategic decisions in Europe. And we live in today in a very serious lack of leadership in Europe. And the expression of Brexit, another question, is an expression of very, very, very serious lack of leadership. We have problems in Brussels. Okay, we have problems in Brussels. I don't like bureaucracy. I don't like a lot of things that happen in Brussels. But I personally believe that this is not exactly the most important problem. Look in the bureaucracy in the UK, and look in the bureaucracy in Brussels. It's totally incomparable. The bureaucracy in the UK is biggest than the bureaucracy in Brussels. You can. This is the reality. Another thing is to manage 28 countries is very complicated. If you talking about the new enlargements, is more complicated again, no? And bad. Worst is the situation that you can divide this. And all the exercise of the populism, of nationalism, back to tribalism, to tribe, against, that is the expression of nationalism, I know very well in my country. This is a serious mistake. This is totally absurd. It's a very, very, very not progressive policy. It's very reactionary policy. And keeping this, improving this, thinking about the reorganization of the European Union with UK or without UK, with a hard Brexit, with a deal with Brexit, is totally indispensable in the future. But keeping, please, keeping the unity.
One more? Anybody over here or here? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You speak about the values of the Atlantic relationship, the prosperity and peace that have resulted from European Union, and yet obviously there are these forces of disaggregation that are happening worldwide. While on the one hand we can see the benefits from a distance, what do you see as the fundamental drivers of this movement of disaggregation that's happening across the planet? And what are some practical responses that can be brought to bear?
We Europeans commit a lot of mistakes, and we produce reaction in our people because, well, we take no good decisions, a lot of things, no? But let me one thing, or two things. Well, and the current situation, political situation, the dominant political situation in the US, tendency in the US, at least in the administration, with all my respects, is against the European Union. They don't like the European Union. They prefer the disaggregation of the European Union. They are very happy with the Brexit, and they are very happy with the established bilateral relationship with countries, but not, in this case, with the European Union. Put an example. If you're looking now, for example, in NATO, yeah, it is true that the American forces there is not exist in Europe. No, it's untrue. We have more American troops, for instance, in Poland or in Romania. It's a consequence of a proposal in NATO? No. It's a consequence of a bilateral agreement of the US with Poland and with Romania. This kind of situation undermine these institutions and undermine the institutions that establish credibility in the security policy in the world is very complicated. If you define every day that the European Union is a problem, it's a very serious problem, and you invited some people, not only in UK, in other countries, trying to establish problems in the European Union, well, this is another thing. This is a mistake, in my view. And then we Europeans commit our mistakes as well, now, in terms of domestic policies. No? But today, for instance, you have, you can look in the situation of the Eurozone, of the lack of growth in Europe, and not taking decisions, governments. Monetary policy can exist 3-4 years more, but it's over. And you're taking a lot of decisions inside of the country, for the welfare system, for pensions, for retirement, for a lot of questions. If it's not, you can blame Brussels, but it will be untrue. It will be more difficult. The domestic governance is more difficult than the European governance. But this is in the case of the US. Look in the case of Russia. What is the policy of Russia? Dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing. And what is the policy of the extreme right in the north of Europe and the extreme right or the left right or the left wing in the south of Europe? It's populism. It's against system. It's against the European Union. It's against the unity. And this kind of populist forces, of nationalist forces, radical forces, fundamentalist forces that challenge the liberal order that represent, in this case, the European Union, in my view, is very negative. And as you know very well, there are several kind of political attitudes, no, or leaderships: inactive, conservative, proactive, or aggressive. I defend the proactive leadership. And maybe in Europe, we needed a more proactive leadership.
Good place to end. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.